Thanks for joining today. We have about an hour booked out to discuss all things performance marketing. We have 3 topics to chat through, which our panelists will take us through, and then we're going to do questions at the end. I'll pop up a Q&A box, and please kind of put in through the webinar the questions that you have, and at the end we'll try our best to get through as many as we can, but it works well when people do it kind of as we go. So that would be great. I'll introduce our panelists in a minute, but before I do that, I'll tell you a little bit about me and 3Search if kind of a few people on here aren't aware. So 3Search is a marketing recruitment agency. We focus on marketing and digital roles across the UK and US. I've done solely performance marketing for about 6 years and have placed a number of people with Inez, who's on this call, and a number of clients in London, which has been great. And I'm really keen to use the network that I've built up over 6 years to connect people, to share like knowledge and ideas and learnings to benefit their career in this space. So this webinar will hopefully be the first of many like webinars and events that can help people do that in performance marketing. So I'll start with our panelists now. So we have Inez, give us a wave, from Growth HQ. With us today, we have Christian, the head of growth at Vargas Holdings, and we have Tom, the performance marketing director at Flashpack. I'm really thankful for them all for like taking the time to do this. I really, really appreciate it, and I know they'll be great. So thank you again, guys. I really appreciate it. Inez, if you want to kick off our first topic, that would be amazing.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks for the intro. Yeah, today we're definitely discussing a mix of topics, and Jasmin asked me to kick off the first one. So I got a spicy statement at the end, but I'll introduce it first. Diversified in the marketing mix is a topic that all of you and performance marketeers across UK and wider afield have on the agenda, right? So we don't want to be purely reliant on 1 or 2 channels. We're always thinking about what's the next way to drive incrementality, be that incremental user growth, incremental revenue, subscriptions, you name it. Now, as part of my role at Growth HQ, the questions I get asked often are, should we invest in TikTok as a channel? That's the new thing. Or can influencer marketing actually be a way to drive sustainable user growth? Or is it a pure brand play? But possibly the most often asked question is, how do I reduce my dependency and reliance as a business on Meta and Google, the 2 big ones? They're getting more and more expensive. My industry is getting more and more competitive. I'm really squeezing my margins. I don't see how I can spend more here. How can I grow in other fields? So that's the question I'd love to discuss with the other panelists today. And as a statement or my personal opinion, I believe it should be every business or performance marketer's goal to have less than 50% of your marketing growth be dependent on paid social and paid search, specifically to avoid extreme spikes or dips in your performance. So yeah, I'd love to know, Christian and Tom, what your opinions are and how we could, like what our recommendations are for everyone who's participating and watching the webinar, how to, increase your marketing mix and diversify.
I'll take my first sort of thoughts on that, and it is a really spicy take. Personally, I've never worked anywhere where the sort of like the spend on your Google-based channels or your Meta-based channels is, less or, around the sort of like, or any less than sort of like the 70% mark. And I imagine there's probably lots of advertisers on this call who are relieved to know that there are, successful marketeers who still do, for all intents and purposes, rely on those channels. I would say maybe there isn't necessarily a hard and fast rule. I've worked at places where it's closer to 90%. I've worked at places where it is more around that 70% mark. And we're going to get to it in a bit, but I think attribution is a big part of that, just making sure that you are capitalizing on what's right for you, whilst also, more to your point, Inez, perhaps having a more open mindset to trying new things and having sort of like the courage, conviction, and the dedicated resource, if possible, to, giving those things the time and breadth they need. Like TikTok's a very good example. At Papier, an e-commerce company that does personalized stationery that I was last at, we put about 3 months and significant amounts of budget into testing TikTok and getting it live. So having a coherent and cogent plan to try and do so, and do some expectation management at the same time, is probably the way to sort of ingrain that culture of trying to diversify, as opposed to just looking for like a cookie cutter or a cut and paste solution. You've got to really sort of think about what works for you.
Yeah, I completely agree, Christian. I think I've been in the same situation where majority of companies I've worked in have actually had a majority of their media spend across those two channels. So I think a couple of things to keep in mind, because Inez, the 50% I think is a great long-term aim. And a lot of businesses here, so people on the call will be at in businesses at various stages. And in reality, the Googles and the Facebooks of the world are those like easy kind of gateway drugs to longer term marketing. And we're talking about performance marketing, and separate discussion in terms of kind of all marketing, all performance marketing can also be brand marketing, and we might touch on that stuff later. But it's easy to start in those places and invest a lot of budget there, but they have very, very short-termist impact on kind of like your awareness in the market and growing that awareness. So let's take Google, intent-based, right? So you're not actually going to really grow your market, your addressable market, or your awareness within it with Google, because it takes people searching for relevant subjects to reach you. You might a little bit catch people who are searching around things and they weren't familiar with you, but generally not so much. Facebook, you definitely do, but the way that Facebook and other social platforms work is you're optimizing to the people most likely to convert, typically within a 7-day window. So by the very mechanics of these channels, we kind of take a short-term approach. Whereas a lot of other channels, and we've got everything from kind of like influencers and affiliates through to digital out of home, podcasts, for example. Well, these are places where we can actually invest in different ways with different mechanics and drive that longer term growth and be able to, I suppose the other half of this piece is around incrementality, figure out if you're getting incremental reach as a result, those incremental conversions from going to those. So in summary, I think you end up starting out in a business, investing in those places where you get the really like short-term feedback and those the low-hanging fruit. But over time, figuring out how you as a business, and this really comes down to the attribution we'll talk about next, how you can actually shift more of that media towards, I suppose, awareness creation. That's going to actually help you fill up your funnel and be able to convert those people over time.
Yeah, like I think both of your points are really good, right? And I totally agree. I said for a reason that my statement was spicy, because like me too, most of the businesses I speak with on a day-to-day basis, they are quite dependent on those channels, and it is about figuring out how to test that new channel, right? And Tom, what you're saying about kind of marketing 101, it's like think about who your customer is, think about who your potential client is, and like draw out the marketing or the consumer funnel, right? The decision-making funnel, and figure out what channels would have a role. Because one of the mistakes I often see being made is thinking that every channel has the same or should have the same end-to-end mechanism, right? So the affiliate and partnerships channel, which is obviously the ones I'm specialized in, luckily they have that end-to-end opportunity, because you can work with an influencer all the way at the top of the funnel, or a PR or newsletter, and then with a discount site to convert all the way at the bottom. But a lot of the other channels, Tom, as you point out, they're better placed kind of like halfway through the funnel or more towards the lower end of the funnel. So maybe like the second part of this conversation, we could share some of our learnings or our tips of like, how would you go about picking that next channel? So like take TikTok, for example, right? Like I think in the prep for this webinar, all of us said, we get this question asked a lot, you know, should I invest a third of my budget in TikTok? Because it's a huge marketplace. So it seems to have similar looks and feels of like a Google or of a Facebook in terms of potential. what do you guys think? Like, should a business invest in TikTok? And if they decide to do so, like, how should they go about that to ensure it's an incremental focus test?
I think it speaks to one of the things that you've mentioned in regards to where in the sort of like the funnel steps, if you want to sort of like really help visualize it, it should sit. And a lot of that is becoming just very familiar with the unit economics of either the company that you're in or the client that you have. So for example, in more of a e-commerce framework, and again, I'll speak to the last sort of success story I had with TikTok. It was an exercise in identifying the fact that it could work as a pretty effective DR channel, because TikTok for shopping is relatively well set up. There is already like an existing sort of network of content creators that you could easily sort of leverage, or, you know, either through sort of like a commission or affiliate structure, you know, like utilize as a direct sales tool. Whereas for other businesses, that might not necessarily be the case, whether it's because of audience composition or like the product itself and the sort of like the purchase mechanics of it. It might not necessarily work in that sort of DR space. So it's about just being very sort of upfront and frank and honest when you're putting together these test plans. To your point, where is it? Where does it sit? And what are the sort of the success metrics I want to use against it? And it will never necessarily be the exact same ones as the existing channels that you're maybe trying to compare it to, because none of these platforms are comparable. Even sort of, to Tom's point, your search and your direct response campaigns that you run on paid social, if you want to get really granular in the funnel, they do sit at different places as well. So a lot of it comes down, for me personally, whenever, you know, testing out a new channel, it's an exercise in what funnel step does it live in and how would it sit in my unit economics based on the understanding that I have of my audience. That's the exploratory bit at the beginning, and then trying to really spell that out for stakeholders is the best place to start. And yeah, quite often then it comes down to sort of like having the courage, conviction, and sort of like the constant communication on like how that's progressing versus hypothesis, and if it diverges at any point, you know, making note of that and acting accordingly.
Yeah. TikTok is a fickle beast in my experience. So I think that it's a relatively immature platform in terms of advertising and marketing. There's amazing success for a lot of organic creators, but again, that's purely driven by what's working, what's trending at the time. I think a couple of things are true or going to be true. One is that there's like TikTok as a search and discovery platform, and pulled into Google is going to be massive. So even if you're not thinking about it as like a paid DR platform, it's worth starting to explore the search landscape for TikTok and what that can mean for your business. From a DR perspective, yeah, it's relatively immature, but they're investing a lot in the product, in the ads product, and they'll continue to do so, investing a lot in the measurement side. So should you try it? Well, there's a lot of assumptions around what audiences are on TikTok and whether they're right for your business. And, you know, if you understand your business and your audiences, your prospective customers, then it might be the platform. But for example, I've run TikTok and spent a lot of time and energy and money trying to get it to work for a $30 fitness subscription app. Didn't work. Whereas at Flashpack, we sell $4,000 holidays to 40-year-olds through TikTok ads. And so like there's no kind of sense of whether like your audience is on there really until you start investigating it and testing it and working on it. I think the other interesting thing about, you know, the incrementality side of things and testing these new platforms is that it might not work necessarily in the ways that you think about. So it might not be that you're seeing as many in-platform conversions as you're expecting, but stuff that we found. So Becca, the paid media lead in my team, ran an amazing kind of like paired market test in the US. And we actually saw a massive uplift in traffic and a bunch of consideration actions in the cell that we were running TikTok in. That didn't necessarily show up in the in-platform metrics. And there's a bunch of reasons for that. You know, platform tracked conversions aren't perfect. So actually, when you think about incrementality, about layering these types of channels on top of your existing activity, on top of all the channels you're already running, like Facebook and Google, keep in mind that they might be having a different like assisting impact, which is also meaningful, and that you need to maybe take a more holistic view on the approach they're having. I'm not saying just spend the money and assume they're actually doing good things and creating awareness, but actually put a strict measurement program and test in place to work through that and figure out if they are having any impact at all, and then what that is. And then you can say, great, actually there is incrementality there. We can continue investing in it.
Cool. With an eye on the time, I think let's summarize the subject and then hand over to Christian. So I think we all agree diversifying is a good strategy. Is 50% of your budget spending on channels outside of Meta and Google, is that the right number? Possibly not for your business, but it's an admirable goal to have, we all agree. In terms of incremental tests, when you want to diversify, when I take all of our points combined, I guess one of the main ones is know your audience, like who are you targeting and where do they hang out? Understand the goal of the test. So are you trying to drive assisted conversions? Are you trying to drive brand awareness all the way at the top of the funnel, or actual like click-tracked conversions? And then, and here comes the segue, have the right data, right? So have the data to be able to draw conclusions. And with that, I'll hand over to the next topic about data.
Seamless. Yeah, I think it's a natural evolution, the format that we've gone for, because already when talking about incremental channels, there is a natural progression into how you measure that, how you assign the value that it's driving. And you know, attribution's been a real source of uncertainty in performance marketing and growth, you know, since I started my career, you know, approaching 10 years ago now. We've gone from more probabilistic modeling, if you think back to days when people were trying to get a good handle on how to measure the impact of things like TV, you know, through to, you know, the mid-2010s, with hyper accurate deterministic profile matching, multi-chain attribution models, almost every click and data point, you know, tracked, modeled, and then value assigned to it. And with the looming deprecation of cookies, additional privacy concerns, ad blockers, people are unsure how to embrace opportunities or approaches like incrementality testing, MMM. And a lot of the questions that we had coming in were around how performance teams are dealing with less and less data. What's replacing these attribution models in organizations that don't have specialists that can, or data scientists or really established teams that can, you know, put together really robust media mix modeling. And my attempt at a spicy take is that it might not necessarily be cookies or explicitly cookie based, but I don't think interaction-based attribution modeling for performance and growth is going to go anywhere in the short to medium term, or possibly ever. And I think my logic, or my argument for that, is that so much of our industry's sort of success and how it functions is predicated on data-driven attribution, performance measurement, and modeling. But I'd be really interested to know, you know, from everybody else's experience on the call, how much do you rely on things like click or cookie-based tracking, and what other sort of tools or complementary measurement have you put in to, you know, either replace it, or, as I'm potentially going to sort of argue, sort of support it?
Yeah, I think we use the term triangulation in some of our previous conversations, and I know, so Inez and I used to work together at TransferWise or Wise.com, and I know so much of our approach to attribution there was influenced by a few people, but one thing that really influenced it was, how did you hear about us? And this idea of, as well as relying on your click-based stuff, on a unique user level, actually asking and getting some first-party feedback from them. And so my maybe philosophy is a bit of a grandiose way to put it on attribution, but my approach to attribution is very much that of triangulation, with keeping in mind that people are irrational, we're humans, and we're actually looking at human behavior. It's easy to kind of get lost in the numbers and data, but we're trying to understand what drives people's decisions. And that's not always a clear rational route. And also that everything is inherently flawed in terms of tracking, and every system, every measurement tool, every platform is going to come with a bias. And so it's fine to rely on one, but keep that stuff in mind, and that it's going to tell you one part of a story. So being able to say, well, actually we had this many click-based conversions, and actually our aggregated in-platform conversions, maybe we did a lift test to look at incrementality as well, was this, but then for that channel, our how do you hear about us was slightly higher, so maybe there's an impact we're not looking at. And using all of those things in conjunction to figure out as a business what makes sense in terms of what you're trying to do. So yeah, triangulation for me is really important, and no one over reliance on one thing.
Cool. I personally am a big fan of that post-purchase survey. It's a relatively innocuous way to add like a really important validating data point in your measurement. For example, at Papier, where I last was, we used that as a data point to insert into a position-based attribution model. So it was a traditional 40-20-40 approach. 40% of the attributed revenue we'd give to the first interaction, 40% to the final interaction, but knowing that there are ad blockers, cross-device sort of snafus, and additional data points, we knew that numerous interactions in that were being missed. So we tested numerous different ways to integrate that, but we ended up using that post-purchase, that how did you hear about us, as if it corroborated with the final click, then it wouldn't necessarily supersede any of that data. But if there was a distinction between the how did you hear about us and the final click, we would use that as the first interaction. Now, I'm not saying everybody on the call or in the seminar needs to necessarily go down that route, but it's just a good example of looking at the different measurement and data collection points you have, and again, sort of triangulating them or using them to sort of thread together the sort of the story that you're trying to understand and unpick from the numerous data points. You don't necessarily want to say we're going to measure things one way and one way only. It's going to be this, or it's going to be MMM, or it's going to be incrementality. You're going to have to sort of play around with what makes sense for your business's unit economics to maybe sort of try and get a combination. Lots of people were asking about MMM. Has anyone dabbled with it, and sort of from an operational standpoint, how do you use it, or how do you think like the practical applications of it are in contrast to something like a very accessible like cookie-based way of tracking things?
It's kind of been dragged kicking and screaming into the current world, and I know that there's Facebook and Google have both operationalized. It's like various scripts to try and operationalize MMM, but in reality, I think that in the same vein as incrementality studies and lift tests are sense checks and kind of like semi-regular ways to check the overall investment mix and understand if what you thought was happening from your kind of ongoing signals is definitely the case. That said, I haven't, especially recently, practically used. I know there's also, Christian, you touched on them. There's a number of kind of like platforms and services which are now trying to kind of more operationally use MMM. So I'd love to, if anyone has experienced that, love to understand how they're doing that and the success of that.
It's something that we've dabbled with. So probably the most prominent provider is a tool called Measured, who originally sort of started dabbling with app measurement many years ago, but have pivoted numerous times, just based on all of the accrued sort of knowledge and learnings that they've had in the industry. There's other sort of media planning platforms or sort of tools that try and integrate it. So things like Media Tool is one that I've sort of like discussed and pitched, but quite often they try and do a hybrid approach of effectively trying to sell you a full measurement solution with an MMM component to it. At Pape, we did end up settling with having a dedicated data scientist to work on it, but again, it's not necessarily an operational sort of solution that we have in place of click tracking, to your point. It is more of a qualifying approach. So you can look into third-party providers, like Measured in particular seem to be sort of the biggest player. But I would also say, like, if that is too far a step in your sort of measurement toolkit, just in terms of, you know, budget, and sort of your sort of tooling or software budget as well, you know, don't hesitate to, you know, use other measurement techniques like incrementality testing, which effectively is trying to do the same thing. It's trying to corroborate. So yeah, whilst it is definitely a useful addition to the measurement sort of landscape, I would say it's not going to sort of solve all of your problems. You've got to look within sort of your resources, your sort of measurement gaps, and try and fill those plugs with common sense like approaches to data, which is like a very much a growth thing, as opposed to like a performance marketing or platform specialist approach to things as well.
Yeah, I think from my side, like a few things. I'm listening to both of you, and I think a few of these things, like to put it in Lehman's term, it's very advanced, right? So like having a data scientist in place, often like the team is quite a bit bigger. So at TransferWise, at Wise, we had that luxury, but we didn't have that the first few years, right? When we were just testing out channels. And I think that's the key about data, right? Like you have different data sets about the same channel. For example, with affiliate marketing, you often use a tracking provider. That data versus your Google Analytics versus your last click attributed data, it often like looks different, right? So for me, when you're possibly, well, not only like earlier in the stage, but maybe also like further along, it's about understanding what the goal is of this data and the goal of an MMM or an attribution exercise. And like someone once, and I don't remember who said this to me, but someone once explained an attribution model to me by saying it's ultimately your team or your boss's choice of where to allocate budget, right? So there's different decisions that take part. So for me on an operational executional level, if I am head of paid social, my input in that attribution model is obviously to try and defend that, you know, more of the budget goes to me. Whereas from an affiliate perspective or PR perspective, let's say, I'd be scrambling because there's much less data points. And then you have the, you know, the how did you hear about survey, and you're kind of championing on that data being taken into the attribution model. But I just wanted to kind of add that take of that that I think we all agree that there's no one answer of attribution or MMM or where to allocate your budget. But the cool thing about looking at data is that it can help you steer your strategy, right? So you should always make your questions like as specific as you can, collect data points, interpret that data, and then kind of take the next step. But understand that it is not mutually exclusive from something someone else in another channel decides or does. Thinking about that customer funnel, and that it doesn't only have to be last click, it can be an assisted click, etc. So yeah, I just wanted to add that kind of point of view. If you're earlier on in the journey of attribution or data, that might be something helpful to think about.
For sure. Think about what a media mix model does. This is how I try to sort of explain it to friends and peers as well. It's effectively taking your click-based data points, but then it's also taking things like spend, impressions. If you were ever sort of doing it for something like TV, it would be ad stocks or frequency. And it's effectively saying all of these things put together, how do they impact the others? And we've touched on this when we've been talking about incrementality and sort of how does adding something into the mix, or I'm going to use the phrase conversation because it is an ongoing conversation. How does that impact sort of more macro, you know, performance of my business? So it's less about setting up a system that will be, you know, not touched, and more about maybe having a conversation around, if we add or subtract different data points, what does that do to our understanding of where that revenue is coming from? And that's a really healthy way from like a growth perspective to try and tackle measurement, I think. You do have some very sort of staid, constant, certain measurement techniques, but then there are other sort of constant questions you should be asking about what you are doing with your spend and where it's allocated and how that does impact things. And I think on that subject, we kind of do agree. In my attempt to wrap up, I would say there's no one-size-fits-all solution to measurement, unfortunately. We've used the phrase triangulation because that's a really logical and concise way to consider how you should look at these different measurements and different sort of ways of attributing value. Stick with something that fits your business's unit economics, whether that is, just looking at last click, whether it is something slightly more sophisticated, but then consider other measurements and other data points that you have to complement that, to give it context, to give it more meaning, and use that to sort of help have the conversation about where you think the value is coming from. And quite often, if you are close to the business's unit economics and you're relatively consistent with your hypothesis and test, I think this data point will show us like this outcome. Quite often, that conversation evolves relatively naturally within the business anyway. I think that's a really healthy way to approach it. And it's something that not just a head of performance marketing or a head of growth should be doing, but it's a mindset that you should be trying to install within your immediate teams, within your platform specialists, within sort of marketing adjacent professions, whether it's a weekly trading setup with like a finance or an operations team. It's that conversation around where that value is coming from that you should be aiming to have week in, week out. It's an ever evolving story, measurement and attribution these days, which leads us, quite neatly into the sort of the final topic that I think we want to cover off.
I was
which
going
is
to
about.
say that was a wonderful tee up. Thank you so much, Christian. So I'm going to talk about the future of growth and culture within performance marketing teams, and I want to give a couple of points or opinions that I have. The first one is that I think marketers have got lazy, right? And I'll come back to that in a second. The second one is that to be a successful marketing team now, it's not enough just to have a bunch of channel specialists. So on the first point, marketers have got lazy. I think all of us have got lazy over the past, 10 years. The reason why is because we've devolved into very specific parts of our trade generally. And I think some of that's driven by agency models, and this very detached agency model where you've got really specific media buyers doing paid search and paid social, and then you've got a different creative team or even a different creative agency, and then all of that kind of that knowledge and data and value, or understanding of where the value is as a result of that is lying often with the clients. And then you might have a branding agency somewhere else, or brand managers within the business who are probably playing the role that we should all play of actually understanding our customers. So this kind of like spread of understanding and this ability to turn around and say, oh, actually, like, it's not my problem. Like the creative was shit, or oh, the site experience, the product wasn't great, or actually we had bad info on who we should be targeting. I think nowadays, to be successful as a performance marketer, you have to consider all of that stuff. It's amazing that like a lot of people are going back to the very basics of marketing and doing stuff like Mark Ritzen's mini MBA, which is like really basic stuff around understanding who your potential customers or who your market is, and actually looking outside of your businesses to the general market. So I think there's a need for all of us to expand, irrespective of whether you're like a paid social exec in a startup or you're like leading a team of performance marketers in an agency or whatever. Like, you and your team need to be considering everything from creative through to like who your customers are and what their personas are, through to what the actual product experience is. So I suppose on that, I'd love to hear Inez and Christian, what skills do you think it's important for performance marketers to be having now that maybe weren't considered a couple of years ago?
Such a good question, and I can hear a little bit of the wise culture in your topic as well, because I think I definitely, and you as well, I guess, have been lucky to be part of a business where where there was so much transparency and there was not a lot of here's what you're going to do, your paid social and push a few ads live and come back to me and report on data, right? It was about understanding your customer. And when you talk about the last 10 years, that's all my career. So like, I guess I've become quite lazy. No, just kidding. But like, I definitely, I agree with you on the fact that hiring a performance marketeer is incredibly difficult. I mean, Jasmin's on the call, she knows. We've had many conversations on my next hire. And I kind of want to, I go back to my first hire at TransferWise. I was trying to hire an affiliate marketeer without affiliate marketing background, because what we were trying to do was not traditional affiliate marketing. It wasn't, which was at the time comparison sites and discount codes. So I had to challenge myself to think, well, who's going to drive growth? And I echo a lot of what you're saying, Tom. So understanding what, and even from an agency side, right, we definitely try to get really close to the client. So understand what your brand, be it you're at an agency and you're talking to your clients or the business you work for, what are they trying to achieve? What is their product or service? How is it different from competitors? Who are your customers, right? It starts as simple as that. But then on the performance marketing side of things, when I was hiring that first person, everyone that came through was either very strong analytically or a very good salesperson. And finding that first hire that was good enough at both, but not a star at either, was the challenge. But that was the right person, because I didn't need someone who was a brilliant analyst and couldn't sell, because they couldn't do the job. And so my recommendation, if you're looking for your next performance marketing hire, is figure out what they need to be able to do to drive growth. And I agree with you, Tom, that that's not only being a specialist, but at times it is, depending on how big your team and your business is. Yeah. It's about what the skills are. So the analytics and the sales are often, the communication is often important for the field I work in. But I'd be very keen to hear from the rest of you, like what you're looking for.
Quite often when I'm hiring, because a growth approach takes numerous different data points, numerous different sort of disciplines, and it's an exercise in somebody being able to sort of understand that bigger picture and thread them together. Quite often when I'm interviewing, I try and base questions that sort of help me unpick whether or not that's how somebody's brain works. So for more junior hires, quite often it will be a question, whether it's sort of like a fictitious commercial model or the commercial model of the business that I'm hiring for, and ask them to sort of effectively explain to me how that business model works and then how marketing would apply to it, as opposed to saying, can you tell me how to optimize an ad in Business Manager? I'm less interested in that, because that's a relatively straightforward skill, which with automation as well is easier to pick up than ever before. But if somebody is able to express the creativity and the curiosity to try and unpick like a business's unit economics and then tie that to possibly how to improve it. And when I say improve it, I don't necessarily mean just from a marketing perspective, because things like conversion rate optimization, partnerships, some of these less like performance marketing orientated disciplines is also something that eventually I would want them either to directly contribute to or just have a really good understanding of. It's that ability to sort of comprehend and almost imagine what the possible connotations of how a business works is something really, really valuable that I look for. Most growth marketeers spend as much time working on things like profit and loss, or looking at spend versus expenditure, as opposed to just channel performance. So these are the sorts of traits that I look for in people that I'm hiring. When it comes to maybe helping people upskill so that they can develop those skills and those talents within the existing workforce, it's something I try and introduce through professional development plans. When we're talking about career progression, growth is sort of like the natural trajectory for many marketeers. And a good example of this is if you've got somebody who is almost pigeonholed into something like paid social, you want them to be far more engaged with the creative briefing ideation, and ultimately sort of reporting off the back of that as well, and then thinking about the connotations for that potentially in other channels. So I've had paid social leads in the past who have then also led on above the line sort of briefing and planning, and ultimately the measurement of it as well, because it helps tie some of these different funnel steps and helps tie some of these disciplines together, and it transforms them from a paid social marketer or a paid social lead into ultimately like a growth or a prospecting growth marketing manager. And I've had similar things with paid search specialists as well, people who are really at the knife edge of conversion. I've had them look at things like landing page briefing, landing page optimization, and ultimately being part of conversion rate optimization processes as well. So it's about introducing that multidisciplinary approach into people who might be a bit siloed or cookie cutted at the moment for me.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to both develop people, but also help the business, is rather than think about focus on a specific channel, it's maybe focus on a specific area of growth or a part of that funnel where those skills I think are very transferable, as you suggested. And Inez, to your points on hiring, again, it's very important to look at not what is the kind of channel or what is that job title, but really what are we looking to achieve and what skills do we need in order to achieve that. An interesting then thought that came up of what you said, Christian, around being able to brief creatives. I think another thing is actually the platform changes we're seeing, and with more automation across stuff like Facebook and Google, actually if you're in paid social and you're not really strong at creative briefing, even like creative ideation, and especially being able to give feedback on performance to creative teams, you're not going to go very far in your career in that field, to be quite honest. So I think leaning into those other areas of marketing and those other kind of like parts of what contributes to growth in your business is really important. So one other piece we've kind of talked about, well, first off, we've talked about kind of like rounding out ourselves as marketers and the need for that to be a bit more evolved nowadays. But the other thing then is the team and like the shape of a marketing team. So I just wanted to spend a couple of minutes talking around what shape your marketing teams have taken. So I've been fortunate to generally exist in marketing teams where there's been what I would term full stack. And in then new teams I've joined, I've really tried to carry that through. So being able to produce the content, the creative, the media, being able to run that media, being able to measure impact. So having people like analysts and data scientists in there, and then engineers or product people to be able to actually kind of like change the product. That's such a big lever for growth as well, or build tools that help us convert people or capture intent, this type of stuff. Again, that evolves over time, but I think there's that mentality of understanding that to be successful in marketing, you need to be able to pull all of those levers, whether individually or building a team that can kind of do that self-sufficiently. So yeah, what about yourselves?
I think some of the things you're saying, like it's so dependent on how big your team is already, right? So when before I started Growth HQ and went back into affiliates and partnerships, I was a marketing director at a fintech, and that team wasn't that big. So we had to lean on outside professionals, and we were almost lucky that generation, 10 years of like lazy people, because they were specialists in the field. So it's definitely like thinking about where you're at as a business and how many people you already have. But I think it's more about as we all three agree, that you understand that it's more than just performance marketing, that it's more than one channel, that it's more than, and that you have to be very honest and self-aware as a team and as a business, what skills you have in-house, what do you need to hire for, and where do you lean on external professionals. I think one tip is WhatsApp groups. They popped up overnight during the pandemic. And initially I found them really irritating because WhatsApp was my private life, the only thing that wasn't business. But now I love them. If I have a question about anything, performance marketing related, business, running a business related, I pop in the relevant WhatsApp group, ask a question, and all of a sudden there's all these specialists that will, help you figure it out. So yeah, I think that's kind of my take. Like it really depends, but just try to understand for your business what it is that you need next. And I completely agree, Tom, that you cannot point a finger at creative anymore and say, or the product of your business and say, that's why it's not converting. Like, yeah, and if you truly believe that, like, work together with the creative. If they're not in your team and you don't have a full stack team, but you have a design agency, you know, like, sit around a table for a day and just kind of brainstorm it through, like, speak the same language, rather than kind of doing your own thing.
Yeah. One almost sort of semantic transition that, you know, I've been making in sort of recent roles in recent companies is moving away from the concept of the marketing team and trying to sort of build it more as a marketing sort of network or community. So you will have people who, you know, will have to a degree fixed day-to-day or week-to-week roles in terms of, you know, some of the core things that they need to do. But to Inez's point, there are other things outside of that core sort of personnel who make up the capex on your budget that you will also, you know, need and, to be honest, like, want to lean on. So yeah, having a good network of sort of peers and, you know, and fellow marketeers doing things like knowledge shares is a great way, you know, not just to keep abreast of things, but also, you know, to sort of outsource some of your creative thinking and some of your testing ideas. Encouraging, you know, people, your FTEs to engage with that as well is really, really healthy. And yeah, relying on the occasional freelancer to, you know, whether it's in the short, medium, or even long term, you know, plug a potential gap, whether it's execution or, you know, just helping you upskill your team is really, really valuable. So try not to think of it as like, I have 4 employees for my team, and try and think of it more as like, I have a network to leverage or a community that I can lean into. Because as we get more multidisciplinary, like, the number of things that you possibly don't know but could learn is just getting bigger and bigger, really.
Yeah, I like that concept of it as a community rather than just, this is my headcount. And also, I think generally when you're growing or hiring or considering the contractors, whatever you need to do to build that community, think again back to this idea of, okay, what skills am I lacking? Not what job titles am I lacking, but am I lacking someone who's maybe built their own like e-com site before and actually knows the dynamics of like how to tweak on-site conversion, stuff like that. Even if you're not hiring in a CRO lead, finding someone who's at least got some experience or had to do that in other roles and stuff like that. So think about the specific roles and then hire those within the jobs you're looking for as well. I think that's it on that subject. Again, to summarize that, I think we all need to consider what our roles are beyond just the specific channels or specific areas of expertise, and looking at how we can overall contribute to growth. And then thinking about how we can build the teams to do that, whether that's actually building out these full stack teams, considering it a bit more of a community, and bringing in some outside support. And again, that's going to massively differ based on your business and your size of business and size of team. And then, yeah, just be really, really specific in that hiring, thinking more about the skills you're looking for rather than just the checkbox competencies or experience. Actually, what can people contribute beyond just the job title, and where do you need to kind of round out your team? But yeah, that's it on growth and culture within performance marketing teams. And now I think we're going over to Jasmin for questions.
Yes, thanks, Tom, and thank you all. That was really good. So questions. So I'm going to stop presenting now and open up the questions box. So you can ask questions on, oh, my laptop's frozen, on the topics we've discussed, or just anything generally, any pain points you have in your team, any burning questions that you have, like, use this forum kind of, yeah, so we can discuss them. So feel free to pop questions in the chat box. So if I start a discussion, you should be able to see that. Can anyone see that? That popped up for anybody?
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
sorry.
I'm not
I think
sure.
if you navigate to Q&A at the top of your screen,
Yeah.
you can ask a question in Q&A or in the chat.
So if you, the chat one at the top left is where you would have to click on your kind of laptops or phones to ask the question. Simon, where you posted is the right kind of place to post, by the way. We may not have any questions.
I have a question in the meantime for Christian and Tom. What's your like main thing you're trying to figure out in, not personally in life, but work-wise, in 2023? You know, like what's like your main topic that's on your agenda at the moment?
I think there's a move. So we had an over-reliance on paid media and kind of flashback 1.0. And so how do we evolve our content production and SEO content and beyond the obvious stuff, and take more of that landscape for solo travel, which is our kind of our core focus. And then the other one's like, how can we as a marketing team influence word of mouth? That's a channel, like kind of like word of mouth referrals. That is very much a marketing or growth channel, and it's as much our responsibility to do that, which is a very low CAC channel, and it has huge potential, as much ours as anyone else.
Tom, have you found trying to incorporate word of mouth as, you know, like an option or a measurement technique within, you know, the sort of how did you hear about us framework as well?
Yeah. So we've asked that for kind of like from the crux of that being a thing, and it just shows you how much of often how small your channels are in comparison to that, and so being able to influence that has even more weight in what you do.
I actually oh, sorry, Christian, you go. I was going to ask a separate question.
I was going to say, yeah, like measuring. We talked a lot about attribution and sort of saying like this customer acquisition came from this, but you know, the knock-on impacts of, you know, just being able to run significant amounts of, you know, maybe paid media and what that does to the impact of your organic growth is something that you should always be mindful of as well. I once had a consultation with the director of growth from Revolut, and he spent a lot of time, you know, working and developing frameworks for what he referred to as K-factor, which isn't used as much these days, but it is effectively measuring the volume of spend that, you know, some of your paid marketing has on the impact on sort of word of mouth, and trying to sort of extrapolate some of that. And it comes back to the triangulation question that we were talking about earlier, I think.
Yeah, great shout. Just to jump on Hannah's question, are there any new channels you recommend testing outside of Google, Meta, and TikTok? So first off, like, where do you think your audiences are? So one thing we're testing at the moment is, and I've done this in previous business, but flashback, looking at podcasts. We believe there's an over-index of our kind of like core 30s to 40s skewing to female audience on especially true crime podcasts. But like, so that's one place, and podcasts can be very much DR. There's a lot of measurement solutions, like Podsights and Magellan.ai that work there. But again, figure out where you think your potential customers are.
Another good example for anyone who works in sort of businesses with like local outlets. So for example, I've worked at a music company that specialized in recording studios dotted around the UK, Germany, and the US. And we found that, you know, there were occasional sites like Nextdoor, which wouldn't necessarily, you know, you class as your traditional like paid media channel, but was actually surprisingly efficient in sort of unlocking a community of people talking about, you know, local services. And it's something that I've been looking into again with the new venture that we're launching in June, around sort of the green space as well. Places like Nextdoor, communities like Reddit have both been particularly strong sources of like relatively inexpensive like traffic and interest.
I'd naturally recommend affiliates, but that's because I made a business out of it. No, I'm joking. Like affiliates is like, when you think about affiliate marketing 2.0, right? So take for a second discount sites, comparison sites, and cashback sites, which definitely can play a good role for your business. But if you're quite heavily dependent on paid search, for example, look who else ranks for those keywords, right? So you can buy an ad, you can rank organically through your own SEO strategies, but then there's a whole bunch of other sites that rank for those keywords. You know, like Money Saving Experts in the fintech world is one of the biggest traffic drivers for a huge amount of fintechs, and that's a type of partnership you can strike up by launching an affiliate partnership, right? So definitely would say check out affiliates. I think Michael's question is very interesting as well. It's like, would you recommend someone who's a specialist in a channel to learn about another channel, right? Like given our points on you needing to become more multidisciplinary, I'd say it really depends on what your future goal is and like your career goal. Like, and I'm not saying 20 years from now, right? But I know people who are so passionate about their channels that I'd completely stick with that. You can go freelance and you can go, or you can, work as a contractor and if money is a motivation, you can make a lot of money like that. You can work for multiple brands, which is exciting. I think the point is more understand the wider business, right? So I don't think a paid social specialist needs to be a specialist in affiliate marketing as well. They're different beasts. As top level understanding, very important, because if you want to become a marketing director, you're gonna have to potentially hire an affiliate marketing and learn and be able to ask the right questions. So yeah, I'd say it depends on your own career goals, but it never hurts to have a top level understanding, kind of a Facebook for dummies. Like I regularly read like 101 blog posts about all these other marketing channels that I'm not a specialist in.
Just on the last point, really quickly, because I know we've got to wrap up soon. There are good paid media agencies out there, but there's a lot of fluff in a lot of the bigger ones. And so I think why it happens is A, because the people you hire really care and their jobs are probably on the line if it all goes to shit. And B, you haven't got a lot of layers in there that you're paying for, which traditional media agencies, where there's a lot of like head count that push up the costs and just a lot of fat margin that agencies take. I also use agencies and there's some great ones out there, so I'm not dissing them all. But like typically you get to a point in your scale of spend where you're also probably paying proportions of your media spend to these agencies as well. So there is just naturally a tipping point where you're spending enough that it makes sense to in-house them, and you've got people who are way closer to your team, probably way more passionate about your business and going to invest more of that time and bring this cost down. But like there are good agencies out there. Happy to recommend a few if anyone needs any. Hit me up on LinkedIn.
Nice. Well, I think that brings us to the end. So just kind of wrap it up. Thank you to Christian, Tom and Inez for sharing your wisdom with us. It was great and it was amazing. Thank you. For everyone who kind of logged on, we will send a recorded kind of video to everyone as well, so you can kind of refer back to this if you kind of joined late or missed anything. But yeah, hopefully we'll have another webinar and event soon, and thanks everyone for joining. See you later.